Hi, this is Ken Pyle. We're at the Parks Associates Connections Conference, but we just happened to have a new friend of ours, Bill Norton, who goes by the name Dr. Peering. And Bill is coming out with a book here on peering and what it means, and it's really good. It will be a very good read. I can't wait to read it because you really explain how the peering has evolved from 20, 25 years ago. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the book and the motivations for writing it?
Absolutely. One of the things I noticed when I was working at Equinix was there's a lot of confusion in the internet peering environment. People would misuse terms. So what I did is I spent a lot of time talking with the peering coordinators all around the world, asking them very basic questions like, what is your definition of peering? What's the process you use to identify who you'd like to peer with? And when does peering make sense? All that kind of stuff. And I would jot down what they said in the form of a white paper. And then I would walk the next group of people through that white paper to further flesh out the list, and after about 100 walkthroughs I would have something that represented the community mindset on a previously undocumented process. So what I've done with the book is I've assimilated all of this material and rewritten a lot of it so that it all made sense and flowed from beginning to end. This actually, I believe, is the only book that talks about, from soup to nuts, everything about internet peering.
Yeah, and one of the things I failed to mention in kind of the introduction was that you were among the founders of Equinix. You also chairman of the NANOG group, and maybe you can talk a little to that. But this has put you kind of in the center of a lot of these events that have evolved over the last 10, 15 years.
Oh, it's been, I've been very, very fortunate. Right from 1995 to 1998, I chaired the North American Network Operators Group, which is the operations forum for the North American Internet. In 1998 to 2008, I was co-founder and chief technical liaison for a very large-scale data center company called Equinix, and they build co-location facilities now all around the world. These buildings are where these interconnections happen. This is where the Tier 1 ISPs interconnect, where the cable companies interconnect, where the content companies interconnect. So all of my time was spent facilitating that interconnection among these parties. So I was in a great position to see how all this stuff works.
And it has evolved, and one of the things that has impressed me is lately you've been going over to Africa and other locales, kind of sharing this knowledge.
That's right. It turns out that the consulting work that I do is very interesting to the folks in South Africa and the folks in the greater African continent, Eastern Europe, places like that. These guys are just starting to get their peering ecosystems pulled together, where they're trying to get the Tier 2 ISPs to peer with each other and the content companies to build in and be local in those ecosystems. Everything about peering is surrounding interconnecting to bypass the Tier 1 ISPs or to interconnect to improve performance. So these guys are really starting to build a pretty significant ecosystem, and the information in the book is seen as really quite valuable. There's one other thing I found really interesting. The folks in Africa, we tend to do more consulting gigs with the executive teams, the guys who pull together the marketing folks, the sales folks, the CEO, the CFOs. This group comes together in 2 days, and after the 2 days, they have a good sense of what peering is and what the strategy should be. So it was interesting. I was initially targeting the technical guys, but as it turns out, the business issues seem to be more relevant to the African folks.
Well, I think that's something, and again, I'm looking forward to reading the book, because in there you touch upon concepts like paid peering and implications for things like net neutrality, some buzzwords there. So I look forward to kind of hearing more about that.
Sure. It's interesting. As you look at how the ecosystems around the world have developed, you tend to see the early stages where the incumbent telephone companies really rule the roost within a country. I call these guys the Tier 1 ISPs because collectively the Tier 1 ISPs have access to the entire internet region solely through their free peering relationships. And you see that consistently around the world. Every ecosystem has the notion of these Tier 1 ISPs. What you've seen evolve though over the years is the power has shifted. So the Tier 1 ISPs are still important, but now you have what I call a fat middle, where the Tier 2 ISPs and the CDNs and the large-scale network-savvy content companies are peering traffic directly amongst themselves, therefore bypassing the Tier 1 ISPs. It's no longer the case that all traffic has to go through the Tier 1s. Now it can go more directly between the fat middle. But here's the really interesting part. Over the last couple of years, there's a new emerging trend, and that is where all the power resides in the access networks. The access networks control access to the eyeballs behind those access networks. So that becomes important because the content guys, the Netflixes of the world, or the CDNs that deliver the Netflix content, those guys want to get that content as topologically close to the eyeballs as possible. And to do that, they could go through the Tier 1 ISPs, but that's a more circuitous, more latency-prone, more packet loss-prone route. So companies like Comcast can offer paid peering, and they say the price is about the same price as transit. So if you're a CDN, you could send your traffic through the more circuitous route, or for the same price, you can send it directly to the access networks. So the access networks are starting to get money for that content that's going to the eyeballs that requested that content. This is a really interesting shift in power.
It is, and I think that's what makes this very timely because of everything that's going on in the world, and from Washington to Silicon Valley. So, and one last thing, having experienced this with you on a personal basis, you're really good with games. You come up with them, you're really clever, and you bring that to your workshops.
That's right. The peering simulation game has always been a hit. I've done about 35 or 40 of these around the world. One of the reasons I did this is I gave a talk at a carrier conference, and I was trying to explain how the internet interconnection regime is a little different than buying and selling minutes, where you have cascading settlements going across the entire system. Now, in internet, it's a little different. And when I delivered that message in a conference in the UK, it didn't quite come through. So what I did is I put together a peering simulation game where I bring up on stage, after introducing the definitions of peering, after introducing the process of peering and the economics of peering, I bring up 4 people from the audience, and they roll the dice, and they acquire network territory, and they build into exchange points, and they negotiate peering with each other. All this is done live on stage. So what I try and tease out of this are the power dynamics between the players. For a large network, it makes less sense to pair with a smaller network than for a smaller network to pair with a larger network. So as a result, you may end up seeing concessions being requested. And these dynamics are really quite interesting because they mirror very closely what happens in the rest of the internet pairing ecosystem.
Well, Bill, I appreciate your time here, and good luck with the book. Thanks.